Hey, it's Ajeya. The FIFA World Cup is an international football tournament held once every 4 years, and it's arguably the biggest sporting event in the world. This year's World Cup is being held in Qatar, and the host country has come under a lot of scrutiny for several reasons. And as a fan, I'm wondering what's going on. So today we'll be trying to learn about what happened. How are we as fans, or even players or coaches, supposed to engage with the sport considering all these ethical issues around it? How can FIFA avoid making the same mistakes in the future? And how do we keep an eye out for such issues, not only in football, but in our day-to-day lives? So let's dive right in. So let's start by looking into why it's such a big deal to host a World Cup. Check this out. So here we have these Brazil fans fighting some Argentina fans. And in comes this English fan to beat these guys up with the flag while this Portugal fan is just enjoying the scene. And all of this seems to be happening in what looks like a graveyard. A graveyard in Kerala, India, a country that does not have a team participating in this World Cup. That goes to show you just the power and reach that the sport has across the world. And that was just one example. This is a time when the love for football spreads beyond the most dedicated football fans, and most of the world is paying attention to this one event. In 2018, more than half the world watched the World Cup, which is about 3.5 billion people. And the final alone was seen by a combined 1.12 billion viewers. For half the world to be paying attention to your country for an entire month is a huge honor and an opportunity to share your culture with the rest of the world and to build this national identity. We go from people not being able to point at Qatar on a map to paying their full attention to it for an entire month. And this is not just an opportunity for Qatar, but the entire Middle East to be this source of positivity and to host this celebration that brings together people from all over the world. So we can understand the motivation for a country like Qatar to host the World Cup, but something was not quite right. The decision to host the World Cup in Qatar was highly controversial for several reasons. Let's start with some geography. Qatar is located in the northeast of the Arabian Peninsula, and the terrain here is mostly a desert. During the summer, the temperatures here reach about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, which would be oppressive conditions for football players to play for 90 minutes. So in 2015, they made the decision of moving the World Cup to the winter when the temperatures seem more moderate. They also introduced these cooling systems in the stadium.
My name is Dr. Saud Abdel Ghani, but my friends call me Dr. Cool. I am the engineer behind Qatar's air-conditioned stadiums. Our technology uses a combination of insulation and spot cooling. This means we only cool the areas where people need it, like the pitch and in the stands. This helps to make our systems more environmentally friendly.
So credit to them. It does seem like they thought about this problem of how the heat's going to impact the fans and the players, and they made the decisions to move the World Cup and create these cooling systems in a sustainable way. The issue with moving the World Cup to the winter, however, is that all the domestic leagues that usually happen in the winter have to move all their fixtures to before or after the World Cup. And now we might potentially see a lot more games shoved into a lot less time, which increases the fixture congestion, which has already been a problem that managers have been talking about. Here's Jurgen Klopp.
Ladies and gentlemen, FIFA, UEFA, stop. Premier League, FA, blah, 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 please start talking to each other. There must be one meeting where they all sit together. And the only subject should be the most important part of this game, the players. And that didn't happen.
He's calling for all the football authorities to come together and make sure that this doesn't really happen. So it raised the question of how much do we keep prioritizing adding more games and making more money out of these games over the players' health. It's yet to be seen how they're going to address this issue in any meaningful way. But we can move on to the next issue. In 2010, when the decision was taken to host the World Cup in Qatar, it seemed like a tall ask for a small country. Qatar is about 4,500 square miles. And for comparison, the next World Cup is being hosted in North America, across Canada, United States, and Mexico, while Qatar is like half the size of New Jersey. So we now need new stadiums, roads, airport upgrades, accommodation for fans and the players, training facilities, all built over the next 10 years, which is not only going to be absurdly expensive, but it's going to require a ton of workers. Money wasn't the largest problem, since Qatar is one of the richest countries in the world thanks to their oil and natural gas deposits. It's estimated that 10% of the world's natural gas deposits are in Qatar, and they're the third largest exporter of natural gas behind Russia and the United States. It's estimated that Qatar has spent $220 billion on infrastructure since 2010, when they were chosen to be the host. What Qatar does not have a lot of is workers. The population of Qatar is about 2.9 million, majority of whom are migrant workers from surrounding Asian and African countries. So these are workers in their 20s and 30s from the surrounding countries: India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Kenya, Philippines, who want to take the opportunity to go to Qatar, where they'd earn more than they would in their home countries, so that they can send some money home to their families to pay for their children's education and stuff like that. And they work with recruiting agencies in their home countries who interview them, make sure they're fit to work and healthy. These recruiting agencies charge the workers a recruitment fee. So the workers end up taking loans to pay these fees before they even start working, just to have the opportunity to go to Qatar and make more than they would at home. So that sounds ridiculous. Why are these workers needing to take loans and pay recruitment fees before they even start working? It kind of comes down to this. This is Qatar in the middle, who has all these construction companies competing with each other to make the bid to build a piece of infrastructure in Qatar. And they're all trying to bid the lowest amount so that they win the contract. So they're incentivized to cut costs, and part of the costs they cut are these recruiting costs. So the recruiting agencies in all these other countries aren't being paid as much as they should. The thing is, the recruiting agencies themselves are incentivized to not charge the construction companies a lot, because they're competing with other agencies and they want to win the contract with these companies. So they're all trying to cut costs, but someone needs to pay for the flights to go to these countries and the costs of interviewing and hiring these workers. And unfortunately, the costs just come down to the workers, who end up taking loans and paying unnecessary fees. Once these workers reach Qatar, they're often trapped in jobs that pay less than they expected. And why do I say trapped? It's because of the Kafala or sponsorship system. This is a legal framework in Qatar and some other Gulf countries that gives private companies full control over the workers' employment and immigration status. So a worker under the system is not protected under their local labor laws, and this leaves them very vulnerable to being exploited by the employers. So the employers pay for the workers' flights, fly them to Qatar, and often confiscate their passports, visas, or mobile phones. And they put them in these really congested, poorly maintained dorms. Imagine being stuck in these dorms with no freedom of movement in the middle of a pandemic with poor healthcare. So they're living in these poor conditions. They don't even have the freedom to change their jobs because their employment and immigration status are so tightly linked. They need their employer's permission to switch jobs. They're essentially just at the mercy of these employers who have so much more power over them. Let's talk about their working conditions. We talked about how hot it gets in the summer and they had to move the entire World Cup to the winter. But this luxury is certainly not going to be extended to the workers who work all year long. It gets so hot in the summer that in 2007, they banned working outdoors between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. So the workers would just wake up really early and get started before it gets extremely hot. Even though they aren't working during the hottest hours, it's still pretty brutal conditions to be working for hours together and doing all this heavy physical labor. Over time, these workers started developing health conditions, and they were dying at a concerning rate. But their cause of death was not always attributed to injury or some work-related cause. If you look at this death certificate here of this migrant worker, it simply says the cause of death is acute heart failure due to natural causes, which is extremely vague. And most often, apparently, they just say acute heart failure, respiratory failure, heart attack, something really generic, which aren't really considered work-related, so their families aren't even compensated. Are these workers just dying of natural causes like these death certificates claim, or is this actually a consequence of working in the heat for so long? I found this paper that tries to answer this question. It was published in the journal Cardiology, and it's called Heat Stress Impacts on Cardiac Mortality in Nepali Migrant Workers in Qatar. They found that although across the world about 15% of 25 to 35-year-olds were dying due to cardiovascular diseases, among these migrant workers, the figures were 22% during the winter and 58% during the summer. And this increased mortality rate during the summer was most likely due to heat stress. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of these migrant workers for a second. Imagine you're from one of these countries and you see the opportunity to go to Qatar and make a lot more money that you can send back home. But all of a sudden you've taken a loan, you're stuck in debt, you're getting paid less than you were promised. They've taken your passport, you're stuck in these squalid dorms, you're working in this intense heat and are developing medical issues and don't have any protection from the local laws to really get help with any of this. This was unacceptable. But on a more positive note, the World Cup has brought a lot of attention to these issues, and human and worker rights groups have been working with the Supreme Committee that's in charge of organizing the World Cup in Qatar to bring about a lot of change and reforms that have improved a lot of these issues. They started studying the workers' work conditions. They recorded their body temperatures, dehydration levels, and came up with a lot of new workplace policies.
Able to stay at low levels of occupational heat stress was because of the comprehensive heat stress mitigation plans which were already in place, including cooled and shaded rest areas, mandatory health screenings, specialized cooling workwear, and most importantly, the empowerment of workers to self-pace and take frequent breaks.
So yeah, some credit to them for going back, looking at these experiences and taking some lessons. Qatar's actually now becoming a leader in heat-resistant work technology, which is becoming more and more relevant with climate change becoming a bigger issue in a lot of places. They also added some policies and programs to make sure the workers aren't paying those recruitment fees that we talked about earlier. In 2014, they introduced the Workers' Welfare Standards, and in 2017, they introduced a universal reimbursement program. And these make the companies that hire these workers prove that the workers did not pay any recruitment fees in their home countries. And if they did, the companies are required to reimburse them for the fees. Another positive development was that Qatar became the first country in the Gulf region to allow these migrant workers to change jobs without the permission of the sponsors, which was one of the key aspects of the Kafala system. They also became the second country in the Gulf region after Kuwait to introduce a minimum wage for these migrant workers. Now, these new policies and reforms are huge steps forward, but there's still a lot of work to be done to make sure they're actually enforced and implemented correctly. As recent as July 2022, there were around 270 violations of their new summer working hours, which prevented workers from working from 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. outdoors. And the improved recruitment practices often tend to be the exception and not the norm. We got to make sure these reimbursements actually get to the workers. The workers shouldn't be afraid of going to their employers and requesting reimbursements for all those recruitment fees. We got to make sure the employers are actually following these rules and offering it to the workers. So yeah, there's progress being made on a lot of these fronts, but a lot of work still to be done to make sure these are actually good long-term solutions and the workers are actually experiencing the benefits of these changes. But we can move on to the next problem for now. I mentioned how one of the most beautiful things about football is how it just brings together people from all over the world, regardless of their background or identities. I could go anywhere in the world and connect with a stranger who doesn't even speak the same language and talk about our favorite players and our favorite teams. This means that fans should be able to go anywhere to support their favorite teams and not be worried about just being themselves. Qatar, however, has pretty strong anti-homosexuality laws, and homosexuality is punishable by up to 3 years in prison. Now, Qatar has consistently maintained that they do welcome all kinds of people, including those belonging to the LGBT community. Their attitude has kind of been, hey, everybody's welcome, but you should respect our culture when you're here, which is fair, but kind of tricky when the culture might be treating your identity as a crime. Now, this is especially difficult since football has been used as a platform to promote anti-discrimination and inclusiveness for several years. The One Love campaign, for example, was started in 2020 by the Dutch Football Association to speak out against discrimination.
With the One Love campaign, we're propagating the fact that differences don't matter because we all share the same love. By wearing the One Love armband, we want to emphasize that our aim is to unite and connect, that we're against any form of exclusion and discrimination anywhere in the world. Let's enjoy together.
So as part of this campaign in 2020, the players started wearing these armbands as a form of silent protest or a sign of solidarity. But for the World Cup, FIFA didn't quite like that. Just a few days before the World Cup, FIFA discouraged the teams from wearing these armbands, and they threatened any players who did decide to wear them with yellow cards. You can only have 2 yellow cards before you are disqualified from the next game, and the teams weren't willing to risk that. Yeah, it's a difficult situation. You do want to respect the country's culture and religion, but also make sure people from all kinds of identities and backgrounds feel welcome and comfortable to come support their teams. And this is not something I have an answer to. I do think we should continue talking about it. So if you have any thoughts, drop a comment while being respectful, of course. Hopefully we can find some ways in which we can all come together and enjoy the sport together, because that's what it's all about. As far as focus on the sport and leave politics and ideologies behind goes, I don't think that's a stance FIFA should be taking, because this is, like we talked about, the biggest sporting event in the world, and 500 million people or more are watching this. And it's an opportunity to get people's attention to issues and different situations that they might not be aware of. If football can be a platform for positive change, FIFA should lean into that and take advantage of it. If people can say, hey, this World Cup helped bring this positive change by spreading a message, FIFA should be proud of that. It might be the biggest compliment they might get. For example, the Iranian fans used the World Cup as an opportunity to bring attention to the women's rights issues and the protests happening in their home country. I think this is a good time to ask, why Qatar? Why pick a country where the lack of infrastructure, the weather conditions, the workers' conditions all make it a pretty unsuitable choice? We should dive into how FIFA actually goes about picking the next host country. In 2010, 5 countries, the United States, Japan, Qatar, Australia, and South Korea, all placed a bid to host the 2022 World Cup. Once FIFA receives the bid, they go through a series of steps, the first of which is a bid compliance, when they look at the bid and just make sure all the documents are in place and they actually followed FIFA's process correctly. Next, they do a risk assessment. This is when they look for human rights concerns, weather concerns, working conditions, a lot of which should have raised some flags in Qatar's situation. Next, there's a technical evaluation where they look at the infrastructure of the host country and make sure they have enough airports, stadiums, accommodation. And they also do a commercial evaluation where they check if the country has enough finances to fund any of this infrastructure if they need to build it. Once FIFA finishes these checks, they actually release this evaluation report where they publish the results of the risk assessment and the technical evaluation. They bring up some important points about the heat and the lack of infrastructure, but they simply just say that, hey, stadium construction, medium risk. 9 of the 12 stadiums will be constructed, and there's no real detail about who's constructing it. Do they have enough workers? What are the working conditions? There is not really any human rights check. The only thing of high risk is apparently the team facilities, because they need to build more. This does feel a bit insufficient and incomplete. If you aren't happy with the evaluation report, don't worry, because it didn't even matter. At the end of the day, the decision came down to this FIFA Executive Committee, the group of all-powerful 24 members who represented each of FIFA's continental bodies. But 2 of these 24 members didn't even make it to the vote because they were found guilty by the FIFA Ethics Committee for trying to sell their votes. So we're down to 22 votes now. FIFA used an exhaustive balloting procedure to do their voting. This meant each member would go to a booth, place their vote. Each round, the country with the lowest votes would get eliminated, and this would repeat till one of the countries has the majority. If you look at the number of votes for each round, it's kind of strange. In the first round, Qatar got 11 votes, Japan got 3, Australia got just 1 and got eliminated. So you'd think their 1 vote would now go to some other country. But in the next round, Japan went down to 2 votes and Qatar went down to 10. So someone didn't vote for what they thought was the best country in the first round. It's just weird. But anyway, at the end of 4 rounds, Qatar got the majority with 14 votes. That led to this moment.
The winner to organize the 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
In the years following the vote in 2010, FIFA was under heavy investigation for corruption among the members of their executive committee. 22 members voted that day, and since then, 15 of them have been banned for corruption, accused of corruption, involved in some criminal schemes, or accused of some other ethical violation but not been prosecuted. And apparently being a boyhood West Ham fan is also a crime. That was a brief summary of how it went down in 2010. Overall, their assessments didn't seem comprehensive enough, their voting system was a bit flawed, and so many of their members have been charged of corruption. Although they couldn't prove that Qatar won the bid for the 2022 World Cup due to corruption, it was pretty disappointing to learn about FIFA's long history of corrupt behavior and how deeply rooted corruption was in the system, especially since FIFA almost became synonymous with football for fans over the last couple of decades. If you want to learn more about the history of corruption in FIFA, I highly recommend checking out the 4-part Netflix documentary called FIFA Uncovered. And there's also a lot of YouTube content on this topic that I'll try to link in the description. So we've covered a lot of issues and concerns that led to this World Cup, but how did FIFA respond to this? Let's look at what the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, had to say.
I can tell you that. Today I feel Qatari. Today I feel Arab. Today I feel African. Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled. Today I feel a migrant worker. I'm European. Actually, I am European.
I'm Indian. Actually, I am Indian.
Not just I feel European. I think for what we Europeans have been doing in the last 3,000 years around the world, we should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years before starting to give moral lessons to people. And we look at this issue of migration and the situation of hundreds of thousands of women and men from developing countries who would like to offer their services abroad in order to help and give a future to their families back home. Well, Qatar is actually offering them this opportunity. Hundreds of thousands of workers from developing countries come here. They earn 10 times more than what they earn in their home country. And they help their families. There will be, I don't know how many fan zones, 8, 10 big fan zones, over 200 places where you can buy alcohol in Qatar anyway. Over 10 fan zones where over 100,000 people can simultaneously drink alcohol. I think personally, if for 3 hours a day you cannot drink a beer, you will survive, especially.
He's referring to another policy change pretty close to the World Cup, that they wouldn't serve any alcohol inside the stadiums.
Because actually the same rules apply in France or in Spain or in Portugal or in Scotland, where no beer is allowed in stadiums. Now here it seems to become a big thing because it's a Muslim country, or I don't know why, I don't know why. We tried, and that's why, that's the one I give you, of course, the late change of policy, because we tried until the end to see whether it was possible.
All right, let's ignore Jeff Bezos' terrible delivery of that speech, but let's dig into some of the things he said. Does he have a point at all? He starts off with statements like, I feel gay or I feel migrant workers, probably as ways to try and empathize with these communities. So he is acknowledging all the problems that the World Cup has caused for them. He then goes on to say that Europeans should not be giving out moral lessons and should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years. And even if that's true, that doesn't excuse all the mistakes FIFA and Qatar made. He then says the migrant workers are actually making a lot more money and they have all these great opportunities by coming to Qatar. And we learned the reality of that and all the struggles that they actually went through. Finally, he makes a statement implying that he thinks Qatar is getting targeted a lot more by the media, maybe because they're a Muslim country. Is Qatar really getting a lot more criticism than they deserve? Maybe. Exploitation of workers is certainly not isolated to Qatar, but all the sensational headlines around the deaths of the workers and all the other controversies just blew up as the World Cup was getting closer. And that's good in a way. We should be talking about these things. That's what this video is about. But it does seem more convenient for the Western media to point fingers at the Middle East and make these issues the sole focus of their content. On the first day of the World Cup, BBC just decided not to broadcast the opening ceremony where Qatar was showcasing a lot of their culture. Instead, they just spent 30 minutes talking about these controversies. Some might say that Qatar deserves this for all the mistakes that they made, but I think that's a fine line between criticism and just plain hatred. We should be able to provide criticism and talk about these issues while also showing that we actually care about them moving on and making progress on these things. And we can criticize and talk about their issues while learning and respecting their cultures. These aren't mutually exclusive things. I don't want your takeaway from this video to be that Qatar has all these problems, but more that these human rights violations and exploitation of workers do happen without us really noticing till it's too late. It's happening all over the world. Companies like Apple, Nike have been accused of exploiting forced labor in China. Facebook has been accused of using cheap labor in Africa to go through traumatic videos and do their content moderation. This isn't isolated to Qatar, but we need to not pick and choose when to pay attention to these things. We need to consistently show that we not only care about great products or great events, but also care about the people behind the scenes who are doing all the hard work to bring these products and events to us. Let's not wait till the next huge controversy to start talking about workers' rights again. Think about your Uber driver or the person delivering your pizza. Are they getting paid enough? Do they have job securities, health benefits? Something to think about. And before I wrap it up, I did want to share that the World Cup, as far as the tournament's concerned, has been going pretty well. It's been entertaining. There's been a lot of positive moments. Check this one out, where the Saudi Arabian fan is helping this Mexican fan put on a traditional kaliji, which he made using the Mexico flag itself. And here's a Moroccan fan who found himself in the middle of all these Senegalese fans. Oh, and here's Anthony Robinson. He hugs Ramin Hussein after USA beat Iran in the group stages. And this is Wang Hee-chan after South Korea qualified from the group stages. Oh, and I want to show you this guy. He's wearing Arab clothes and the Netherlands colors.
Of Messi? No. He's very old, right?
Yep, and he's not afraid of Messi.
Messi is afraid of us. Who?
Yeah, it's getting pretty late. I should wrap things up. My goal here was to primarily just start a conversation. So if you agree or disagree with anything I said, if you have new information to offer, and especially if you learned something new today, leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that jazz. And I'll try to keep creating some educational content that I and hopefully you can learn from. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.